There came a moment in Darth Sidious's life where he felt uncompromisingly jealous towards his master, Plagueis, and this jealousy would end up changing the entire way that Palpatine approached his life as a Dark Lord moving forward. Greetings again, Acolytes and Lore Junkies, and welcome back to the Archives. The relationship between these two Sith was much unlike the typical master and apprentice dynamic that we see in earlier incarnations of the Rule of Two. They were more evolved. While Plagueis established himself as the superior of the two, he was raising Palpatine to be more like his partner, an equal, rather than a subordinate or an eventual successor. And by doing this, during the final years of Plagueis' life, the two would reach a point where they shared the Sith Lord title, and somewhat considered one another to be peers. Palpatine, of course, had absolutely no intention, though, of sharing his destiny with Plagueis, and was waiting for the moment that he could ultimately betray him. But his problem came when it seemed as though his master was simply untouchable, and there was a specific moment in the lore when Sidious had to acknowledge that he was envious of his master. So today, let's open up a new holocron and dive into this moment and how it changed Palpatine forever, as well as his identity as a Dark Lord. This occurred only months before the events of the Phantom Menace. A decade earlier, Plagueis had survived an attempt on his life by assassins, one that left him heavily reliant on a face mask simply to breathe. Plagueis would give up most of his double life as he go Damask, retreat to the moon of Sojourn in order to devote all of his time to his studies into the midichlorians, his ultimate goal. He decided to continue manipulating galactic affairs from the shadows, but only operating through intermediaries, and of course his apprentice, Palpatine. Sidious, meanwhile, was on the front lines. He was a rising politician on Coruscant, quickly gaining popularity as he made his bid for the office of the Chancellor. Palpatine carried out most of Plagueis' will, concerning both politics and the Sith Grand Plan. It was Palpatine rather than Plagueis who was communicating with the Trade Federation, moving the pieces into place for the Naboo crisis to ultimately begin. For a while, Sidious had enjoyed his double life. He liked snaking around the shadows, pulling the strings on both politicians and Jedi. However, he began to feel it was a bit more of an inglorious post. Palpatine's pride was swelling within him, and he wished so sorely to show the galaxy what he truly was. He wanted people to know that he was a Sith Lord, to bow at his feet. So self-restraint was becoming a problem for Sidious. And not only this, but Sidious was beginning to feel like Plagueis' errand boy, more than his partner or even an apprentice. Palpatine was staying so busy that he couldn't really devote himself to his own studies in the dark side, while Plagueis got to swim in it in his isolation. However, things would change when Plagueis' enemies decided to group up with one another. A political enemy, Ars Varuna, a business enemy, Gardula the Hutt, and a criminal enemy, the Black Sun Syndicate. All of them joined together as one over their shared hatred for Higo Damask, the man who was secretly Darth Plagueis the Wise. Each group had, in some way, been cheated or done dirty by either Plagueis or Palpatine, and Palpatine had not seen this coming until it was revealed to him. But these three enemy groups launched a coordinated attack against Plagueis' stronghold world on Sojourn. Using nuclear weapons, they bombarded the surface and annihilated Plagueis' castle retreat. The Dark Lord, however, had used his network of spies to get informed ahead of time of the imminent attack. Therefore, Plagueis had managed to escape and met up with Sidious on Coruscant. Because of Plagueis' seclusion, this was the first time that Sidious had seen him in person for years. The two had mostly communicated via secret holograms and messages, and even then only sparingly. But when Palpatine saw his master again in his penthouse suite, he was astonished by what he witnessed. Plagueis was not the decrepit old man that Palpatine had seen him originally grow into. Because of his studies in the midichlorians, Plagueis had managed to reverse some of his own aging. Plagueis looked youthful and spoke with vigor. Palpatine even mentally commented that his master appeared decades younger, reminding him of when he had first encountered him all those years ago on Naboo. Before, Plagueis had appeared a bit crazed, paranoid, not to mention his powers and age had been taking a toll on his physical form, but his brand new appearance made him speak with boldness and power. No longer did he hide away from the galaxy, but he returned to help Palpatine carry out the Sith plan in person. The time was now, and all of Palpatine's hard work was about to pay off for Darth Plagueis. With strength in his voice, he vowed revenge against his enemies, and tactfully would carry it out. All of this had shocked Sidious to his very core. He had thought his master was breaking down, that he would be easy to eventually discard. But after meeting with Plagueis here, Sidious was musing as to why he had not sensed this attack beforehand. Sidious began to wonder if the dark side had blinded him for some reason, and if it had blinded him, why had it not blinded his master? In Palpatine's own words, his master surviving the attack on Sojourn made him appear almost omnipotent, and him showing up looking vigorous and youthful displayed just how far he had come in his research and powers in the Force. It was in this very moment that Palpatine had to suppress hidden feelings of envy. It fully registered to him that he had been wasting years of his life living a double life, doing all of the dirty work. Meanwhile, Plagueis got to luxuriously study the dark side in secret, in comfort. And now the power gap between the two of them had grown so far that Sidious wasn't even sure how far ahead of him his master really was anymore. Sidious wanted desperately to live purely as a Sith, but instead it was his master who got to fulfill his dream. Palpatine wanted his master's life, to shut himself away from the galaxy and delve into the dark side, becoming exponentially powerful in the Force, and of course, rapidly inching closer to the goal of sweet immortality. When he became the Emperor, Sidious would do this exact thing. He became a recluse and had his regional governors do a lot of the day-to-day running of the Empire, while he made most of the big decisions from behind the scenes, just like Plagueis. He rarely made public appearances, and what appearances he did make to the Senate dwindled as the years drew on. He threw himself fully into his research into the dark side. He made Vader and his Emperor's hands the agents of his will, and during that time he searched ceaselessly for the secret to essence transfer. Palpatine even established all of the cloning tanks filled with his younger clones on the world abyss, and so he had, in a way, accomplished exactly what he was so jealous of his master of doing. He found a form of eternal youth, and got to grow his powers in the dark side to unprecedented levels. The only thing that Plagueis did not get to do was announce himself publicly as a Sith Lord. But as we've broken down in other holocrons, this was purposeful for keeping the Imperial citizens in line. After all, he had already gotten everything he had wanted. Every being knelt in fear, everyone cowered in his presence. However, he would forever be haunted by the memory of Plagueis. In The Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader, we find Sidious musing about Plagueis years after his demise. Most fascinating of all, Sidious wondered what his master may say if he saw what Sidious had accomplished. He seemed to carry a bit of inferiority when he thought about the power and foresight that Plagueis commanded. Sidious was always prideful that he managed to supersede Plagueis' omnipotence by catching him off guard in his sleep. It was a great triumph for him. But it all had to do with Plagueis' accomplishments. He was a Sith who advanced the study of the Force further beyond anything that anyone had ever done before him, except for maybe the Ancients. And when commenting on Plagueis' research notes, Sidious states that he did not even fully understand his master's research yet, nor share his enthusiasm for the scientific process. Because of this, Sidious never mastered the art of manipulating the midichlorians the way that Plagueis did. That power was one of the only things that forever remained outside of Palpatine's reach, and he resented his master's memory because of it. Sidious was insanely clever, a master manipulator, but he was not the scientist that Plagueis was. There is actually an argument to be made that Plagueis was superior to Sidious in terms of intellect, that enabled him to touch powers that remained beyond even Palpatine's understanding. Palpatine's resentment toward Plagueis was rooted in more than just ambition. It was humiliation wearing the mask of patience. He despised his master's obsession with manipulating the midichlorians, a domain of power that even Palpatine could not grasp. Watching Plagueis heal himself, extend his life, and subtly enhance his strength was a constant reminder to the Moon's mastery of the Force was reaching a level that Palpatine had not yet matched. Plagueis' ability to hide himself away from detection, to vanish in plain sight, only deepened this wound. It meant that in the most dangerous arenas of Sith politics, his master could move freely while Palpatine remained in the open, visible, vulnerable. To a man obsessed with control, the idea that someone else could slip through the galaxy unseen was infuriating. Yet, what truly ate at Palpatine was the role that Plagueis had assigned him. For all his political cunning, all his power in the Force, he had become an errand boy, the servant, fetching, maneuvering, carrying out plans that ultimately served Plagueis. When his master spoke of them as equals, it was never genuine. Palpatine could hear the unspoken condescension in his voice. He could feel the truth lingering behind the compliments. He had surpassed his apprentice, and was merely indulging him. The subtle yet constant reminder of his inferiority was intolerable. Palpatine understood the rule of two well enough to know that if he did not act, he would eventually become obsolete. In that awareness, every word that Plagueis spoke was one more nail in the coffin of a relationship that could only end in murder. But anyway, friends, this was why Sidious had a distinct jealousy of his master that we believe never faded. Palpatine is considered to be the ultimate Sith, but there were many powers of his predecessors that he was not able to replicate. And from what is described in the Plagueis novel, Plagueis himself was on a completely different level in his research. He could wield the Force with such complexity that it boggled the mind of even other Sith. It's fascinating that despite how powerful Sidious grew, there were still some limits that he had, and even though he grew beyond Plagueis, he was forced to acknowledge that his master still held on to secrets that would ultimately die with him. But as always, my friends and lore junkies, thank you as always for joining us in the archives here today. May the Force be with you, and I'll hopefully see you again soon.